With a look of disbelief, the billionaire CEO took the crumpled note from the girl's trembling hands. Her father, dying in a hospital miles away, needed a ride home. But there was a catch. Was he really going to help her? Or was this just another chance for him to exploit her family's desperation for his own gain? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Snow blanketed Aspen like a thick white carpet, the icy air crisp with winter's bite. Expensive cars lined the streets, their owners wrapped in cashmere and fur as they glided through the town, unaware of the struggles of those beneath them. But not everyone in Aspen was living the dream. In the middle of it all, a little girl stood on the curb, clutching a crumpled note in her small hands. Her breath was visible in the cold air as she took a shaky step forward, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope. She wasn't like the other kids here. She wasn't worried about skiing or shopping at designer stores. She had only one thing on her mind: her father. Emma's eyes were wide, almost tearful, as she glanced around, looking for the person she needed. The last few weeks had been a blur of hospitals, doctors' offices, and long sleepless nights. Her father, John, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. The doctors said he didn't have much time left. The only thing she knew for sure was that her family needed help. They couldn't afford to keep him in the hospital any longer, but getting him home to Kansas seemed impossible. She pulled the note tighter in her hands as she spotted him. Riley Matthews, the billionaire CEO, just stepping out of his limousine, surrounded by his entourage. The man who could change everything. Her only hope. Emma swallowed hard and stepped forward. Her feet were frozen, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The chance of a lifetime was slipping away, and she needed to take it. As Riley's eyes scanned the crowd, he stopped for a moment, locking eyes with Emma. His polished face gave nothing away, but the cool, calculating expression he wore made her heart race. He wasn't the kind of person who helped strangers. Not like this. "Excuse me," Emma's voice cracked, barely audible over the bustling street. Riley turned his head, his sharp gaze falling on the young girl standing alone in the snow. "Can I help you?" His voice was cold, almost dismissive, as if he had no time for this. Emma's fingers tightened around the crumpled note. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. "My dad? He's in the hospital. He's dying," she said, voice trembling. "Can you help us get home?" Riley stared at her, his brow furrowed. The words hit him with an unusual force. He wasn't used to people asking him for help, not like this. He was used to people wanting something from him: money, access, power. But this girl, she wasn't asking for money. She just needed a ride. He glanced down at the note she handed him, a note written by her mother, detailing their financial situation. He quickly scanned it, his expression hardening as he read. He felt something stir inside him, a flicker of something unfamiliar. But he pushed it down. "Your father's sick, I see," Riley said, his voice colder now, almost mechanical. "That's unfortunate. But I'm not the person you should be asking. There are charities for people like you." Emma's heart dropped, but she didn't let her fear show. "I'm not asking for charity," she said firmly, meeting his eyes. "I just want to get my dad home. He wanted to come to Aspen, once. Please. He doesn't have much time left. I don't know where else to go." Riley hesitated. His cold demeanor was impenetrable, but something about this moment stopped him from turning away. The crowd was moving around them, but time felt like it stood still. The question in her eyes, the raw honesty in her voice, he couldn't shake it. Finally, after a long pause, he nodded curtly. "Get in the car," he said, turning toward his waiting driver. Emma's heart skipped a beat, the rush of hope flooding her chest. Was this really happening? Was he really going to help her? As Emma slid into the back of the sleek black SUV, she couldn't stop shaking. Her father was miles away in a hospital bed, fighting for his life, and she wasn't sure if she had just made the right choice. She glanced over at Riley, who was staring out the window, his face unreadable. Why had he agreed to help? She had no idea, but she knew one thing for certain. Riley Matthews wasn't just any billionaire CEO, and she didn't know yet whether this decision would save her family or change everything in a way she could never expect. The driver started the engine. and as the car pulled away from the bustling streets of Aspen, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger and much more dangerous. Was Riley really helping them out of the goodness of his heart? Or did he have an agenda of his own? And what price would Emma have to pay for his generosity? The silence in the back seat was thick, like the chill that had settled over Aspen. The only sound was the hum of the engine as the car sped through the snow-covered streets. Emma tried to steady her breathing, but her heart was racing, uncertainty clawing at her chest. Riley Matthews sat next to her, his expression unreadable, staring out the window as if the world outside held more interest than the little girl beside him. He seemed untouched by the weight of her plea, unaffected by the gravity of her father's situation. "Thank you for helping," Emma said quietly, almost to herself. But Riley didn't acknowledge her, his gaze still fixed on the view outside. Minutes passed like hours. The snow fell softly, blanketing the streets with a pristine calmness that felt so out of place in her chaotic world. Her fingers gripped the edge of her jacket, the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. She had no idea what to expect from Riley. The way he'd dismissed her earlier, his sharp tone, his indifference, made her question everything. Was he really going to help them, or had she made a mistake? She knew better than to trust people too quickly, but this was different. She didn't have a choice. Riley's voice finally broke the silence, but it wasn't kind, it wasn't reassuring. "You're lucky I'm doing this," he said flatly, his eyes still locked outside the car. "This isn't a charity case. I don't just go around handing out favors to strangers." Emma froze, the sting of his words hitting her harder than she'd expected. Of course. Why would someone like him help a nobody like her? The rich didn't help the poor, they used them, exploited them. Maybe Riley was just another billionaire who thought his wealth could buy anything. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke, but she wouldn't back down. "I didn't ask for charity," she said, her words more forceful than she felt. "I just want to get my dad home." Riley turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since they'd gotten into the car. The coldness in his stare sent a chill through her, but there was something else there now. A flicker of something she couldn't place. "Listen," he said, his voice hard but not entirely unkind. "This isn't about doing the right thing. You're asking me for help and I'm offering it, because I need something from your father in return." Emma's pulse quickened. A favor? What could Riley possibly want from her sick father? "You've been in your little bubble here in Aspen," Riley continued, his voice now colder than ever. "But the reality is, I'm not here to play the hero. You don't know what kind of pressure I'm under. My company's on the brink, and your dad's business acumen might be the only thing that can pull me out of this mess." "What?" Emma's mind was racing. She tried to process his words, but they didn't make sense. Why was Riley Matthews, a tech billionaire, so desperate for help from her dad, a man who hadn't worked in years? And how was her dad supposed to help? He could barely lift his head off the hospital bed. "Your dad was a businessman, right?" Riley asked, turning his attention back to the road. "I need someone who knows how to save a company from crashing. If he can help me with this, he'll be paid, and you'll get what you need. Your father will get the best treatment money can buy." The price? Emma's stomach churned. She didn't care about the money. She didn't care about Riley's deal. All she wanted was for her dad to be okay, for them to go home. But Riley wasn't offering help because of some moral obligation. He was offering help because he needed her dad. This wasn't about saving lives, this was about power. Business. Emma couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. She was starting to realize that this wasn't just a ride to the hospital. There was something darker at play here. Something she didn't fully understand. She glanced at Riley again, his face set in stone, unreadable. He was the last person she should trust. But was she left with any choice? "Why me?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why my dad?" Riley's lips twitched slightly. He looked at her again, this time with a hint of something resembling pity, though it vanished just as quickly. "It's not about your dad, kid. It's about what I need, what you need, and what we both stand to lose if we don't do this right." Was this about money? Was it about his company failing, or about using her father's illness as a tool for something bigger? Riley wasn't talking about family or compassion. He was talking about business. And as Emma looked out at the snow-covered streets, she realized just how dangerous this situation had become. This wasn't charity. This wasn't kindness. This was a deal. And she was caught in the middle of it. The car hummed softly as it cut through the snow-covered streets of Aspen, the city lights flickering in the distance. Emma stared out the window, lost in thought. The moment she'd stepped into Riley Matthews' car, she knew her life had just taken a strange, unexpected turn. But as they continued down the winding roads, something about Riley's silence made her skin crawl. Every now and then, she'd glance over at him, but he never looked back. He seemed so detached, like he was mentally miles away, and Emma couldn't help but feel like she was just a small pawn in a much bigger game. The game he controlled. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Riley didn't seem to care about her father's condition as much as his own agenda. She tried to push that thought aside. He was helping, right? At least he hadn't turned her away. But was this truly help, or was it something more sinister? Riley finally broke the silence. His voice was colder now, businesslike, as if he were back in his CEO mode, a mode that had no time for emotional baggage. "I'm not doing this because I'm some kind of hero, Emma," Riley said, his eyes flicking toward her for a moment. "You should understand that. The real reason I'm helping is because your father might be the only person who can save my company." Emma blinked, startled. She had expected him to talk about helping her family, but business? Was her father some sort of savior for a billionaire CEO's failing company? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with unease. "My dad. He's been in the hospital for weeks. He can barely get out of bed." Riley didn't seem bothered by her confusion. He leaned back in his seat, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. "I know your father's condition, but what you don't know is that he used to be an expert in the very field my company's struggling in. We're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. I've tried everything, but without someone who knows how to turn things around, well, let's just say the business world doesn't show mercy." Emma's stomach twisted. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Her dad was just a man, a dying man. Yet Riley was talking about him like a commodity, like a tool to fix his company. "Wait," Emma interrupted, her voice cracking. "So, you're saying you're offering to help my dad, but only if he fixes your company?" Her breath hitched as she spoke. The realization was sinking in. "That's why you're here, isn't it?" Riley met her gaze, his expression unreadable, but his words were cold and calculated. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Your father has the experience. I just need him to sign the papers. I need him to help me save my company." Suspense builds. The tension in the car thickened. Emma's head spun. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't just a charity case. It was a business transaction, plain and simple. She couldn't help but feel like Riley was taking advantage of her family's crisis. "You're really asking him to make a choice between his family and your business?" Emma's voice was low, but her words cut through the air. Riley didn't flinch. "I'm asking him to choose between his legacy and his illness. This is a life-changing opportunity for him. Think about it, Emma. If he helps me, your family will be set. I'll cover your bills, get your dad the best treatment money can buy, and your future will be secure." Emma's eyes widened. This sounded like a deal she couldn't refuse. The desperation inside her rose. Maybe this was the answer. Maybe Riley's help was the way out. But as the words echoed in her mind, the seed of doubt took root. Why was Riley offering all this? Why her dad? He wasn't some business genius anymore. His health was failing and he could barely stay awake for an hour without collapsing. The more Emma thought about it, the more it felt like a trap. "I'm not sure I understand," Emma said, her voice shaking. "If he helps you, what's the catch? What do you get out of it?" Riley smirked slightly, his gaze piercing through her. "What I get is what every business person wants, Emma. Control. I need someone with the right expertise to keep my company afloat. And if your father signs that contract, we both walk away winners. My company survives and your family can go home, safe, alive." There was a sharp edge to his tone, a barely concealed threat. He wasn't asking for a favor anymore. He was demanding it. The car came to a stop outside the hospital, its headlights cutting through the dark. The building loomed ahead, its sterile, cold lights shining down on the parking lot like the last place someone would want to be. But for Emma, it was the only place that mattered. As the door opened, Riley didn't waste a moment. He stepped out first, his sharp silhouette outlined against the snowy backdrop. Emma followed, her legs feeling weak beneath her. The world outside seemed so different now. She wasn't a little girl with dreams of being rescued. Now she was a young girl caught in the middle of something she didn't understand but desperately needed. They walked into the hospital together, Riley's presence dominating the sterile hallway. The nurses didn't seem to notice Emma, but they noticed Riley. He was a man they couldn't ignore. His suit was immaculate, his cold, calculating demeanor sending waves of authority through the hospital's sterile walls. Emma could feel the tension tightening in her chest. Her father was just down the hall fighting for his life. And now, this stranger, this powerful billionaire, was stepping into her world, as if he belonged. As they turned the corner, Emma spotted her mother sitting in a waiting area, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked up as Riley approached, her brow furrowing at the sight of him. "What is he doing here?" Emma's mother's voice was laced with confusion, maybe even anger. "Who invited him?" Riley stepped forward, his cold demeanor unwavering. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice firm. "I need to speak to your husband." The words hung in the air, and Emma's mother stood, crossing her arms over her chest. "You think you're just going to waltz in here and help us? We've been to every doctor, every specialist. You're not going to fix this." Riley's gaze flickered to Emma, who stood silently beside him. "I'm not here for that," he said quietly. "I'm here to offer your husband a chance, something that could save his life, something that could save all of you." Emma's mother scoffed, her frustration clear. "And what's that supposed to mean? What are you really offering?" Riley didn't answer immediately. He turned his back to Emma's mother and glanced down the hall. "Where is John?" he asked, his voice suddenly softer, more focused. Emma's mother hesitated before pointing to a door at the end of the hallway. "Room 206, she said, her voice bitter. "But if you think he can just get out of this bed and fix your business, you're gravely mistaken." Riley didn't seem to care about the scorn in her voice. He only nodded, turning back toward Emma. "Let's go," he said. Emma followed, her heart pounding harder with each step. She wanted to believe that Riley's promise to help her dad was genuine, but everything about him felt like it came with strings attached. They reached her father's room. Emma's mother stayed behind, clearly still upset, but Emma's attention was drawn to the man in the bed. The man who had always been her rock. The one who told her stories about Aspen, the one who promised they would visit one day, together. Now, he was lying there, pale and frail, barely able to open his eyes. Riley stepped into the room first, Emma following closely behind. Her dad, John, looked up slowly, his eyes blurry with exhaustion, the harsh reality of his condition evident in the way his body was barely able to lift his chest. "John," Riley said softly, but with authority. "I'm Riley Matthews. I've heard a lot about you. You were a businessman once. I need your expertise." Emma's father blinked, his expression confused but still trying to make sense of the situation. I can't, not like this." His voice trailed off, weak and defeated. Riley didn't wait for him to finish. "I know what you're going through. I've been through hell too, but you're the one person who can save my company. I'm offering you a chance to not just get out of here, but to make a difference." He paused, watching John's faint reaction. "All you have to do is sign. Help me save my company, and I'll make sure you and your family get everything you need." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this really happening? Was her father really going to be asked to make a life-changing decision like this, when he was barely holding on? The cold, clinical nature of Riley's words hit her like a slap to the face. Her father's eyes fluttered closed. "I can't, not now." Riley stepped closer, his voice hardening slightly. "You can, John. This is your chance. If you don't do this, your family will lose everything. If you help me, I'll make sure your family is taken care of. I'll cover the medical bills, get you the best care. But only if you sign." Emma could see her father struggling. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes, those familiar eyes, still held a glimmer of something. Fear, maybe, or confusion. But he also looked like a man who had reached the end of his rope, and this was the only chance to escape. What happens if John signs? Emma could already feel the weight of the decision crushing them all. Was this offer really a chance at survival, or was it a dangerous deal that would compromise their dignity? The sterile hospital room was cold, and Emma could feel the weight of Riley's presence. He stood beside her father's bed, his perfectly tailored suit standing in stark contrast to the desperate, chaotic situation her family was in. "John," Riley said, his voice businesslike, "I'm offering you a chance to help your family, to get the treatment you need, but you have to sign." Her father's weak gaze flickered toward Riley. "I can't, I'm too sick," he rasped. Riley's face softened for a second, but the cold undertones were still there. "I understand, but you're the only one who can help me save my company. If you sign, I'll make sure you get the best medical care. Your family will be set." Emma's heart pounded. Was this it? Was her father really about to sign away everything for some quick fix? Riley's offer seemed too good to be true, but why her dad? Why was Riley so sure that John could help? Emma's head spun with confusion, but the more she thought about it, the more Riley's offer felt off. As her father's eyes fluttered shut again, Emma turned to Riley. "What do you want from him, really?" Riley didn't answer right away. He stood still, staring at her father. "I want your father's knowledge," he finally said, his voice low. "He's the key to saving my business. If he signs, I'll get everything back on track, and your family won't have to worry about money ever again." Emma's stomach dropped. This wasn't about helping her dad, it was about his expertise. Her dad wasn't just a sick man, he was a business tool. Then something caught Emma's eye, something she wasn't meant to see. Riley had placed the paperwork on the table next to her father's bed, a clause about company shares and control. Her heart raced. Was Riley trying to get her father's signature for something more? Was this a deal or a manipulation? Emma glanced at Riley, who was watching her every move. He didn't seem to care about her father's well-being, he cared about getting John's expertise for his own gain. She turned to her mother, who was glaring at Riley. "You're using him," her mother snapped. "This isn't just about health, it's about your company." Riley didn't flinch. "I'm offering him an opportunity, an escape. He gets to help me, and in return, his family gets everything they need. It's simple." Emma felt trapped. Her father was sick, barely hanging on, and here was Riley, offering him an impossible choice. Help him save his company in exchange for health care? But the hidden clause, it wasn't just about saving lives, it was about controlling her father's future. "What happens if he says no?" Emma asked, barely above a whisper. Riley's expression hardened. "Then everything goes down the drain, including your father's chance at survival." The air in the room felt heavy. Emma couldn't shake the guilt, the doubt, and the growing fear that this wasn't a choice her father was capable of making. As Riley waited for Emma's father to sign, Emma couldn't look away from the paperwork. Her father's life, her family's future was on the line. But at what cost? The room felt suffocating as Emma watched her father, barely conscious, lying in the hospital bed. The cold white sheets contrasted sharply with his pale skin, his labored breathing heavy in the silence. Riley stood by the window, his back turned to Emma and her family, his presence somehow more imposing now than ever before. Her father hadn't responded to Riley's offer yet. He was too weak, too fragile to make a decision. His eyes flickered open, his lips parting as if he wanted to say something, but the words never came. Emma's heart raced. She wasn't sure how much longer her father could hold on. His body was fighting a losing battle, and here they were, caught in a game they hadn't asked to play. Riley's deal hung over them like a storm cloud, threatening to swallow them whole. Riley finally spoke, breaking the silence. "John," he said, his tone soft, almost gentle, "you need to make a choice. This is the only way to get your family what they need." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Please," she whispered to herself, but she couldn't speak the words aloud. She knew what Riley was doing. He was pressuring her father, using the urgency of his illness to force him into a decision. Then, in a flash, everything changed. Emma's father let out a gasp, a strangled noise escaping his lips. His body jerked, and in that instant, his eyes rolled back into his head. He collapsed forward, his breathing rushed and uneven, and the monitors beside his bed began to beep frantically. Emma's heart dropped. She leaped forward, panic setting in. "Dad, Dad!" She cried, but there was no response. Her mother screamed, rushing to her husband's side. Riley stepped forward, his calm demeanor barely shaken as the medical staff rushed into the room. He stood at the edge, watching, a quiet tension in his posture, but he didn't move to help. Why wasn't he doing anything? Emma's mind raced. Was this it? Was her father really going to slip away before he could even decide? A nurse pushed Riley out of the way as doctors worked quickly, shocking John's chest to restart his heart. Emma's hands trembled as she gripped her father's cold hand, tears blurring her vision. The seconds felt like hours as Emma clung to hope. Finally, the doctor stepped back. John was breathing again, shallow, weak but alive. The room went silent, the tension hanging heavy in the air. Riley stepped forward, his eyes briefly meeting Emma's. "This isn't a game, kid. Your dad is on borrowed time," he said flatly. "I don't want him to die without making this decision." Emma couldn't believe it. How could he be so cold? Didn't Riley see what was happening? Her father was fighting for his life, and Riley was talking about contracts and business like it was another day at the office. Her mother was beside herself. "You're sick," she shouted at Riley. "He's not a tool for you to manipulate. He's my husband, the father of my children." Riley didn't flinch. He simply looked at Emma, then back at John. "I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm offering him a chance to live." The clock's ticking. Emma was torn. Her father had just nearly died in front of her, and now Riley was standing there asking for a decision that could change everything. Was this really her father's choice? Or was Riley's manipulation too powerful? Her mind was a whirl of confusion, fear, and doubt. She wanted to scream, to tell Riley that she wasn't going to let him use her father's illness like this. But what choice did she have? Riley's voice broke through her thoughts again. "Your father doesn't have much time," he said, his words cutting through the air. "Make the decision, or there won't be anything left to save." Emma stood there, frozen. Was she really willing to let Riley push her family into a corner like this? Was this really the only way they could survive? As the doctors stabilized John and left the room, Emma stood at the foot of the bed, looking at her father. Her heart ached. He had just fought for his life. But now the hardest decision of all was ahead of him, and it wasn't just about surviving. It was about what kind of life he would have left. And then Riley spoke again, his words sending a chill down Emma's spine. "This deal won't wait forever." The beeping of the heart monitor was steady now, but the tension in the room was anything but. Emma's father lay in his hospital bed, barely conscious but alive. The doctors had stabilized him, but it was clear his condition was still critical, and his time was running out. Emma stood beside her father, watching him with a mix of relief and uncertainty. Her mother had left the room to make some calls, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. The events of the last few hours were a blur. The pressure from Riley, the overwhelming fear of losing her dad. It all felt like a dream, but it was real. And now, it was up to her father to make a choice. She glanced across the room at Riley, who was standing by the door, seemingly unaffected by the chaos unfolding around him. His eyes were glued to his phone, fingers scrolling through something she couldn't see. He hadn't moved, hadn't offered any words of comfort. He was cold, detached from everything that was happening. Emma's frustration built with each passing second. She had tried to ignore it, to stay hopeful, but she could no longer ignore the feeling creeping up on her. Riley wasn't really here to help. He was here to use her father. Riley finally looked up from his phone and met Emma's eyes. "Your father's getting the best treatment money can buy," he said, his voice flat. "He wouldn't be getting this kind of care if it weren't for me." Emma didn't respond immediately, but inside, her thoughts were swirling. Best treatment? Was this truly a gift or a way for Riley to secure what he wanted? "You keep saying that," Emma said, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. "But I can't help but wonder if you're just using us, if you're using my dad, his health, his legacy, to save your company." Riley's expression didn't shift. He was still calm, still in control. "I'm not using anyone. I'm offering an opportunity. You don't understand what it takes to keep a company afloat. You can't imagine how hard it is to keep everything together when it's all slipping away." Emma swallowed. "So this is just about your business?" "It's about survival," Riley said simply. "Everything has a price, Emma. Your dad's expertise? It could be the difference between life and death for me, for my company. And in return, I'm offering you and your family a chance to rebuild. If he agrees, everything changes for you. He gets the treatment he needs, you get everything. Emma's heart was racing now. The walls were closing in around her, but she didn't want to make a decision based on fear. She needed to make sure that whatever happened next would be right for her father. She glanced back at her dad. His breathing was shallow, his hand cold under hers. He hadn't spoken much, but she could see the weight of this decision in his eyes. Was this the moment where he signed away everything just to survive? Just then, Riley spoke again, his voice low but intense. You need to understand, Emma. This is the only way he gets out of here. The only way he gets what he needs. I'm offering him a way out, and he can either take it or not. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Emma's father, still weak and disoriented, struggled to sit up in the bed. Emma held his hand, her fingers brushing against his cold skin, but she could feel his grip tightening. It was the first sign of life she'd seen in hours. Riley stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, looking down at John as if he were an object to be studied. Emma's stomach churned. The cold indifference in his eyes made her question everything about his intentions. I've arranged for the best treatment, Riley said, breaking the silence. Once your father signs, he'll be flown out of here and treated by specialists in New York. Everything he needs will be taken care of. Emma's gaze flickered to her dad. He was barely conscious, his eyes still glazed over, but Emma could see the hesitation in his face. He knew something was wrong. Knew the decision Riley was asking for came with strings attached. Please, Dad, Emma whispered, trying to hold back tears. I don't know what to do, but I need you to make the right choice. John looked up at her, his voice barely audible. I don't want to sign. I don't want to be used, he whispered, his words fragile but clear. Riley's face hardened. You don't have a choice. If you want to live, you'll sign. It's that simple. Emma stepped forward, her resolve hardening. She was tired of being pushed around, tired of feeling like she was just another pawn in Riley's game. You're not giving him a choice, she said sharply, her voice cutting through the tension. You're forcing him into this. You're using his condition to manipulate us. Riley's eyes darkened. I'm offering him a chance. You're the one who doesn't get it. Emma's heart raced as she stared at her father. Was this truly the only way? She wanted to scream, to say no to everything Riley was offering. But the truth was, they didn't have any other options. John's hand trembled as he reached for the paperwork. Riley was right. He didn't have much time. Emma watched in horror as her father signed the contract, the weight of the decision hanging heavily in the air. Riley stood there, watching, his face a mask of satisfaction. Good choice, John. You've just saved your family. The door clicked shut behind Riley as he exited the room, his footsteps echoing down the sterile hallway. Emma stood there, frozen, her father's signature now sealed in front of her, a decision made in desperation. Her father, John, lay back on his bed, his eyes closed, his face a mixture of exhaustion and confusion. He had signed, but at what cost? He wasn't the man he used to be, a businessman, a father who had always been in control. Now, he was a sick man, lying in a hospital bed, bound by a contract that would determine the future of his family. Emma's heart ached as she stood there, her hands gripping the papers with a mixture of relief and dread. Had they made the right choice? Was Riley Matthews really offering them a way out? Or was this just another ploy for his own gain? Her mother had stepped out to make a call, leaving Emma alone with her father. The silence in the room felt suffocating. There was no comfort in the fact that they had survived the day. The air felt thick with unanswered questions, and Emma wasn't sure what had changed. Was her father saved? Or had he just sold his soul for the chance to live? The door opened behind her, and Emma spun around to see her mother standing there. Her face was pale, eyes wide with a mix of confusion and frustration. What did he sign? Mary asked, her voice shaky. She took a few steps forward and glanced down at the papers in Emma's hands. What did Riley really offer him? Emma hesitated. She didn't want to believe it, but she couldn't ignore the truth. The deal wasn't about helping her father. It was about control, about leveraging her father's expertise to save Riley's business. And yet, her dad had been so weak, so desperate, that he had made the choice. He had signed. He signed, Emma said quietly, her voice cracking as she spoke. But it doesn't feel like help. It feels like we're in his debt now, like we're bound to him, to his company. I don't know if this was the right thing. Her mother didn't speak at first. She just stood there staring at the papers, her hands trembling. Finally, she whispered, "We had no choice, Emma. But that doesn't mean we'll be free." As if on cue, Riley's voice rang through the door. He had come back. "I'm glad we could come to an agreement," he said, stepping back into the room with his usual cold precision. "Now, your father can get the best care, and I'll make sure everything is handled on my end. I told you I'd make sure you were taken care of." Emma's pulse quickened. There was something in his tone, a sense of finality that unsettled her. He was done. They were done. The deal was sealed, and now it was over. Her father was about to be moved to a specialized hospital in New York, one of the best in the world. The doctors would do everything they could, but Emma couldn't shake the nagging thought that there was a price they hadn't yet paid. Riley glanced at her one last time. "You'll thank me when it's all over," he said, his voice unyielding. "Just make sure you keep your end of the bargain." Riley left without another word, and the room fell silent once more. Emma watched her father as they prepared to move him. He was barely awake, barely aware of what had just happened. The weight of it all was suffocating. But she couldn't ignore the nagging doubt gnawing at her. Was this really the right choice? Did they make a deal with the devil? Was their freedom really worth the price they'd paid? Emma stepped up to her father's side. His hand squeezed hers, weakly, but with a familiar strength she had grown up with. He had always been there for her, always been her protector. Now, he needed her to protect him, to make sure this deal didn't destroy them. But as the doctors and nurses began moving him to the stretcher, Emma knew there was no turning back. The papers had been signed, the deal had been made. She glanced at the window, the bright lights of Aspen now far behind them. What had she done? Would this decision be their salvation? Or would it lead them down a path they couldn't escape from? As her father was wheeled away, Emma stood alone by the bed, the weight of the decision hanging over her. She glanced at the papers once more, the deal she hadn't wanted but had no choice but to accept. And in that moment, she realized that the biggest battle was yet to come. Would Riley's help be their salvation? Or would it become a shackles they couldn't break free from? The doors closed behind her, and Emma's heart sank. Had they really won? Or had they just stepped into a trap they'd never escape?